All right, so hello everyone, I'm Chris Campbell with the Food Institute, and on behalf of DMA, I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar, State of the Industry, 2021 Supply Disruption and What Comes Next. We here at the Food Institute have been tracking the food industry for over 90 years, and in the last year, we've accelerated our programming of podcasts, webinars, and other digital content, and we'd invite you to visit foodinstitute.com to learn more about membership, sponsorship, and advertising opportunities. And with that said, I'll introduce today's moderator, DMA CEO Pat Mulhern.
Thank you, Chris. Good afternoon and good morning and happy lunchtime to everybody out there. And thanks for joining us today. And the Food Institute's done a terrific job hosting our panels here over the past 12 months. And today I'm really excited about our panelists and what we're about to talk to. Three panelists today. Joe Pawlak will kick us off. Joe, many years at Technomic, partner there, and probably one of the better crystal balls on the industry for where sales are heading. So he'll give us, some optimism around sales. And then John Inwright and John Tracy, many of you know John Inwright, heading up supply chain for Wendy's for many years. Prior to that, Yum Brands experience, ran U.S. Foods sourcing activities. And John Tracy's been with the Dot Foods business, currently the chairman, and had every role within that business over his 30-plus year career. And I think with our three panelists today, we're set up to have a great conversation around, post-pandemic and today's supply chain challenges, running in tandem with exciting regenerating sales. So this is DMA's eighth webinar since the pandemic, and we do these really just to convene the industry around current issues, and we continue to learn and adapt as an industry. Today's topic feels like 12 months ago we were all numb, whether you were in the restaurant and multi-unit or independent restaurant side of the business, whether you were sitting in a distribution company or whether you were a manufacturer, the brakes were hit 12 months ago. All of us were numb to today, where we have a lot to look forward to, yet super challenging to predict. So, kicking off with Joe here in a minute and having him talk a little bit of the outlook of the industry and some optimism around sales. And then, John and John, we'll use them to kind of bounce some questions around this recovery that Joe talks about and sharing their perspective and, experiences on what this recovery and the current surge is doing to business and the challenges for manufacturers and distributors alike. So if we can get one thing done today, it's to get everybody to understand it's going to take collaboration to make the best of the situation we're in. I think everybody today, most of you are making an hour of your day to kind of hear what a few of us have to say about our current experiences and what we see going forward. But there's no question, whether it's workers or whether it's products or whether it's predictability or raw materials or any of the number of things we can talk about, we have a confluence of stuff going on in the industry. It's going to challenge all of us over the coming period. So without further ado, let me kick it over to Joe Pawlak. He'll spend a few minutes talking about the industry, and then we can get into it with John and John around their experiences of where they see this heading. So Joe, thanks for being with us, and let me turn it over to you.
Thanks, Pat. Good morning, everybody. What I want to do in a few minutes here is really talk about the current state of our food service business, and not only where we are today, but maybe talk a little bit about where we've come from and where we expect to go in the next, let's call it anywhere from 12 to anywhere to 60 months. What do we expect recovery to look like? As Pat mentioned, if you look at our business last March, this is what happened. The spigot got shut off. We were basically at a drip. We looked at every segment of the business, and because of closures, because of shelter in place, because of quarantining, our business basically shut down, and in many segments almost down to zero, which throughout the year we saw a lot of unevenness as we started seeing opening up, as some areas of the country opened up and then closed again, others opened up gradually. So we saw a lot of unevenness relative to how the industry was performing. As of, I would say, mid-March, we started seeing what we call a surge. Very much a surge in terms of restaurant and food service business coming back. Sales coming back, consumers coming back, more dollars being spent. So again, when you start thinking about a surge, There are certainly positives behind the surge, but also there's a negatives. And some of those that we're seeing today are dealing with the supply chain, as well as we can start thinking about higher prices in the industry. And also we're having some issues with labor, which I'll talk about as well as we move on here. So just to look at, we have some raw data. Now, this isn't anything that's been weighted because it's hot off the press, but showing year-over-year sales growth, March 2021 versus March 2020. Again, think about March of 2020, looking at probably anywhere from the 9th to the 15th of the month is when we started seeing the closures. Seeing very dramatic growth in just about every segment of the marketplace. 80% in fine dining increase, casual dining 67%, fast casual 40%, and QSR up 24%. Big increases on a year-over-year basis for March of 2021. And if you look at restaurant reservations, and again, if you look at the left side of the chart, basically restaurant reservations were at 0% in March, April, and also going into May. And if you look going through April, the most recent data that we have, and again, this is comparing back to the same period in 2019, we're starting to get back to reservations. We're at about a 23% versus 2019 levels. Now, you got to remember, we're still at some capacity restrictions. Not everybody's vaccinated. There's still a little apprehension from consumers. So, but we are on an upward trajectory. Everything from I would say to mid-January, we're at a very steady midway upward trajectory in terms of restaurant reservations, which is certainly indicative of what we see in full-service restaurants. So what's driving all of this? What's driving this surge that we're seeing, or this wave, or this tsunami of our industry? Well, first of all, it's vaccinations. More and more people are getting vaccinations. You know, certainly the news over the past couple of days about the Johnson & Johnson pause is a concern. However, reading some of the press, the expectation is that they will resume shipments probably within the next week or so, after the FDA does a further review. And the expectation is that that will continue to be a viable vaccination. Consumers just have quarantine fatigue. You know, we've been doing it for 12 months. So they just feel like they need to go out, get a meal, and spend money. We've got warmer weather. Weather's getting warmer, especially when we start thinking about the northern states. So people just are out and about more often. It also opens up outdoor dining, which is something that helped the industry when we look at the summer months last year. And then certainly we look at the stimulus dollars. You know, consumers have more money in their pockets from the stimulus dollars that have been distributed in March. And if you look at what happened back in January when we had the mini stimulus of $600, we saw a big spike as well in terms of sales for food service. And with an additional, you know, almost 3 times that amount coming from this stimulus, it's also very positive for our industry, where consumers are spending that discretionary dollars on food away from home. So pent-up demand, that's what we're seeing right now. And we've done a lot of research around pent-up demand on how consumers feel. 68% of consumers say that once it's safe, they are very excited to dine in at restaurants again. Now, the most important point about this is not only the 68%, but it's very excited. And this is on a 1 to 5 scale. So these are the percentages that say 5 on a 1 to 5 scale. So talk about pent-up demand. Very excited, 68%. They want to go out to eat. They want to sit in a restaurant. So you start thinking about those occasions where people go out to eat and sit down in restaurants. That's very positive for segments that have been hurt dramatically. You talk about full service. You think about things such as even hotel food service, because people are, again, out and about. You think about eating in and fast casual. So those are some segments that we're really very positive about. Now, also, not only overtly we think about eating out at a restaurant, but also you look at activities that include food service as a component. So this is a list. Again, we ask consumers to tell us what are they looking forward to doing again once COVID is resolved. Number 1 is hanging out with family and friends. 2nd is going out to a restaurant. 3 is traveling. If you look at all of these activities, in most cases, they typically involve a food service or restaurant occasion. You know, when you're traveling, you're going out to eat. When you're going shopping at a store or shopping mall, typically you're involving a food service occasion or away from home occasion. Going to a movie, you're getting a snack, you're getting a beverage. So again, when you look at all these activities, very much involve food service. So that's positive for our industry. And certainly when you're seeing those surge in numbers and people are getting vaccinated and feeling better about their health prospects because of that, that's driving a lot of our growth. So we're looking at sales on a quarterly basis, and this is just showing indexing each quarter back to 100. And again, this is showing second, third, and fourth quarter. In the middle bar is what that index was in 2020. And in the light bar is what we're forecasting for this year. So as you see in the second quarter of last year, 56.5 off of a basis of 100 for 2019. We expect that to go to 83.8 for this year. It's a very dramatic increase. For the third quarter, again, third quarter is a little bit better as operators were able to pivot and were a lot more sophisticated or gained some sophistication with takeout and delivery and also with outdoor dining. But you see where we expect to be in the fourth quarter at 93.9 versus 2019, and then in the fourth quarter at 95.7. So again, we're seeing recovery occurring this year. One of the things we're watching very closely, however, is inflation. We're seeing a lot of inflation in the marketplace. Big driver is grains right now, year over year, up 30%. Look at things like it's soybeans, so that and other grains impacts a lot of other products. You look at proteins right now. We're seeing double-digit inflation in proteins, beef, pork, and chicken. So that's something that we watch. And because of input costs, raw material costs going up for operators, they also are taking menu prices up. And this 3.7% level, which we've been seeing occurring since last year and now also continuing on this year, is not only being driven by commodity costs, but higher labor costs. Higher costs because they have to buy sanitization products and safety products like masks, as an example, and hand sanitizer. So that's all driving up menu costs. I think right now that's not as much of a concern because there's this pent-up demand and consumers are willing to pay. But once pent-up demand subsides a bit, there may be a little bit of a pushback from consumers on some of the high prices that are being paid. And I especially think on the delivery side of the business, because we're starting to see some very high check averages and check costs for meals that are being delivered. So if we look at our cumulative index, and again, this is indexing back to 2019, looking at year-over-year growth, we kind of view recovery as getting back to that 2019 level. So where are we going to be for each of the individual segments at that 100 level? So you look at total food service, which is the black bar, that will happen in 2013. And again, this is all nominal growth. So this includes inflation, and where we expect to be in a higher inflation environment for a while. So inflation is going to help boost some of this, not only traffic, but also inflation. Limited service, we expect that to recover this year fully. They had a decent year last year. The top 500 restaurants only down 2% among those that were in the limited service part of the business. Retail hosts, we expect them to fully recover, and retail hosts are convenience stores and supermarket food service in 2022. Those that are a little bit more challenged will be in a travel and leisure and non-commercial. So that's hotels, recreation, and non-commercial segments. That recovery won't happen until later, as well as full service restaurants. It's going to take a little bit while for them to fully recover from the pandemic. So at Technomic, we talk about the 4S recovery process. We've already gone through two phases. Survival, March through May of last year, where operators were just doing anything to keep their doors open if they could. Many of them are selling retail products, and we'll sell you a gallon of milk. You know, we'll get those products, we'll sell it to you, and we'll deliver it to you. Then we had this, what we call the start phase, which had a lot of uneven openings, opening and then closing, and then capacity restrictions. Now we're at the surge phase, where we're going to see consistent reopenings, and we're seeing the surge of business, and we expect that to continue through the end of the year. And then in 2022, we're going to start seeing some, I want to call it evening out, but still consistent growth, where we're going to see, again, long-term investment and growth of the business. Okay, so Pat, why don't you take it away from me?
Sorry, Joe, you got me engrossed there. I put myself on mute and I was engrossed. Really exciting to see. I'll come back to you with a few questions. I think taking what your forecast is around sales and partnering that up with John and their view on supply chain will give us some good dialogue. And before I turn it to John Inwright, feel free to post your questions and we'll try to answer them here once John and John get a chance to give you a kind of a viewpoint from the other side of the sales demand. But I'm going to turn it to John Inwright. John, you've been doing this for a good while, as I said earlier. Maybe you can give a brief overview on the supply chain today. I'll leave it kind of wide open for you. You have a good view on the manufacturer's challenges right now. You also have a good view on the distribution challenges. And recently having retired from the Wendy's job, I was thinking about this as you and I talked last week. If Clara was still there, she'd be asking you where the beef is, and you'd be saying, I'm looking for the pickles and the ketchup right now. So let me throw it over to you, and you can give us your thoughts.
Well, thanks, Pat, for that intro. And Joe, I think you did a really good job with the overview for a state of the industry. So the supply chain is recovering, and it's recovering very rapidly. It depends upon what segment of the business that you are in. As Joe indicated, LSR and quick service restaurants have actually done quite well during the pandemic. So anybody that had a good digital network of support for technology and loyalty programs or pickup windows or drive-through or carry-out operations succeeded very well. But it's been choppy. And as we've seen, this industry and all industries really can run into surprise shortages that are unexpected, either, from manufacturing issues that occur in the US, from labor issues that may occur in distribution, whether it's in the distribution center or at the driver level. So the challenges continue, but we are exactly where Joe indicated. We are in a surge recovery right now. People are getting vaccinated. People are getting more comfortable about getting out. And no supply chain is truly prepared for, recovering from a 100-year event, particularly around the growth that we've seen in the economy. And, every member of the supply chain is struggling through. We've seen restaurant operators that have been limiting their menu choices so that they can be more efficient in their own operators. We've seen systems distributors and broadline distributors changing their approach relative to the operators that they serve. We've had suppliers that have run into challenges with labor from time to time simply because of COVID. And I'm not sure that we're past that. I mean, just looking at the North American landscape, I mean, I was reading yesterday that a major producer of poultry in Canada yesterday is now on a 2-week lockdown due to COVID infections in one of their plant operations. So it's challenging. And I think the new challenge that we're seeing for the restaurant operators in the recovery is there is still some discomfort among the workforce relative to coming back into contact with the consumers that are coming into the restaurant. You've got the stimulus that's out there. And I think we've all experienced restaurants where, particularly in QSR of late, where we go by, expecting the restaurant to be open, and at 2:30 in the afternoon, we're finding that it's closed. So I think that those are some of the coming challenges that the industry has to face. So I think the responsibilities of the supply chain partners, whether it's the distributor or the processor or the manufacturers, try to make sure that you're working very quickly and very collaboratively with your operators on how do you remove some of the friction that they're experiencing in their operations today, because this friction is real, and I think it's going to continue, particularly as we move into the summer months.
Thank you for that. I think that's a lot, and it's coming at everybody from all angles. John Tracy, you've been at this again a long time, for 30 plus years. You guys probably in your company started with a couple hundred or 100 suppliers, 50 suppliers at Dot Foods, and I don't know how many you have today, but products are making its way through your supply chain to every distributor in the country and ultimately to every operator in the country. So one of the things that maybe you can add here is, what's it look like right now inbound and outbound versus your experience over the past few decades, and how are you guys tackling those challenges at that?
Thank you, Pat. Thanks for the introduction, and John and Joe, that was real helpful to set the tone. I do want to make sure to all those that are out there that you understand exactly why I was invited. Pat's mentioned several times that my 30 plus years, I think he wanted to have my brothers Joe and Dick on, but decided that they weren't old enough. He wanted somebody that's 100 years old, that's been in the industry forever, and that's why you're stuck with me today. So I will give you a little history. One of the things that we do at DOT is we like to think that we start with data when it comes to most issues and problems. And when we look at things from a historical perspective, we always think data helps. Certainly that's Joe's expertise more than mine, but on the inside of our business, it's a key component. We've been tracking some inbound supplier service levels since the mid-'80s. It was very hard back then, so I would say we really didn't have good data until probably the early 90s, to where it was we could really filter out some of the big stuff where the supplier told us that it wasn't going to come for the next 6 months, and we could get rid of discontinued and things like that. But we have a good 20 to almost 30 years worth of history, and I could tell you we've never seen anything like this. I will say that when we first started tracking it, we were in that 98% inbound from suppliers most of the time from a holistic perspective. A few under, obviously, a few higher, but most were in that general zone. But about 2014, inbound supplier service levels changed. We went through probably 5 years before that where we were in the 97.5 range, and it sort of stabilized around there. And then about 14, it started moving down about a 0.5 point per year every year. And that continued all the way through 2019, pre-pandemic. Now, there's a lot of speculation as to why that occurred. I don't know that anybody's got the right answer. You can hear things in terms of retail was getting more than their fair share of capacity. You hear things about big PE firms buying out CPG companies and putting a lot of pressure on other CPG companies to really cut expenses and improve working capital. Who knows what the answer is? But in 2020, once the pandemic hit, there's no question that retail started. Certainly, they moved capacity over to retail. They had to. Retail volume was way up. Food service was down. They had all sorts of labor issues, just like everybody else. And we have been in that 85% inbound range consistently month over month since April of last year. These are unprecedented, and it occurred again in March. It's a little different, 85 right now, than it was back in last summer, but it's still 85%. And I don't see it getting a lot better anytime soon. Both Joe and Pat and John all mentioned multiple reasons why. I'll just hit on a few just to make sure. I personally feel like labor is a huge component. I think it's a big issue to our the restaurant industry. Certainly, I think it's probably their number one issue right now. I can tell you firsthand, it's the number one issue in the distributor side, and I would suggest to you that it's still a big factor on the manufacturer side, both in terms of being able to get people back, being able to hire people where you need them, especially when you're in a surge, and in many cases where you had to slow the line down because you had to do things in your plant from a social distancing and other perspective that you couldn't do it. So I think that's going to continue. I think the other reason why inbound service levels are real bad is because the forecast is completely unpredictable right now. Nobody has a clue. Nobody's willing to, buck up and say, I've got a real good feel. I just talked to Joe Pawlak, so I know exactly what I'm going to make in the next 60 days. And I don't think that's occurring anywhere in the industry either. So everybody's basically guessing, and they're guessing conservatively because there's so much variance in the supply chain right now. And again, I don't know that that's going to change. You also got the load in that's occurring all the way through the system. The restaurants loading in, the distributors loading in, everybody, the redistributors loading in, everybody's trying to load in and trying to predict, and we just have way too much capacity issue. And then when you combine that with overall supply chain disruption in general, we're obviously hurting the operator a lot. every distributor, ourselves included, are more challenged with labor right now, I would suggest to you, than in my, unfortunately, I have to admit, 40-year plus history in the business. I've never seen a labor environment like this. We are competing with the government, right or wrong, or regardless of what your position is. We are competing with the government to a certain degree, where people are motivated in many cases not to take a job. We've obviously got still COVID concerns about going back to work. And the labor, I don't know of a distributor, and quite frankly, when I work with our overall distribution association that is all industries, I don't know of a distributor, regardless of the product, that isn't fighting for employees right now. I can't imagine any retail operation, food service or otherwise, that isn't fighting hard on the labor side. And I think that's going to continue. I would suggest to you it's going to continue throughout 2021 for sure, and who knows beyond that. And then the final factor I would suggest to you that it's the crystal ball Pat started out talking about. And I don't think that crystal ball, anybody's willing to make huge bets that they know exactly what's going to occur. So they're going to shift capacity, or they're going to make a major capital expansion, or they're going to put a new line in, or they're going to do anything to really offset, because there's still way too much uncertainty, way too much variance in demand. And I think people are going to, especially on the manufacturer side, are going to wait until they see more certainty, less variance, and feel a lot more confident in their forecast before they really are willing to make the major shifts that's going to be required. The final piece I'd share to you is I don't know of any supply chain that's not disrupted right now. I would love to say that food service is unique in this regard, but if you're importing product in any industry, including food, you're disrupted right now substantially. Ocean ports are backed up, can't get containers, lead times are up 30 to 60 days on anything coming overseas. The transportation industry is way under capacity in the U.S. right now, or way over capacity, excuse me. And we're pushing loads. I think everybody's pushing loads. I think that is going to be, unfortunately, a challenge that we all have to work together to try and get through. And the reality is these are unforeseen times and unique situations that none of us have been through. And I think overall, DMA and Pat's message, which I think is important here, is the only way we're going to get through this is through collaboration and working together, because we are in unprecedented times. And even though the disease and the pandemic may slow down with vaccinations and everything, I don't see that the supply chain is going to get fixed overnight by any stretch.
Super insightful, John. Thank you. And I hope your brothers are listening and taking good notes, because they'll probably be on the next webinar. We'll get the young bucks and get.
You're going to bring the talent. Bring the talent in. I know you, Pat.
Joe Pawlak, let me toss one back at you, and we're getting a ton of great questions. So I'm going to kind of bundle some of the things you said and try to ask you, almost two questions at once. The last 3 or 4 weeks, I think we've seen, a terrific spike. So you put March numbers up, and I would say the last 2 weeks of March were terrific. First few days of April, terrific, and followed by a little bit of a slowdown here the last 10 days. So, as we watch sales, it's almost daily now. Not, we can't even look at it in weeks or months right now. To John and John's predictability thing, we have to, we've got to be looking at it hourly, to be honest with you, to forecast well on the distribution side. But question for you is, John teed up the stimulus and, the impacts on the labor side. What's stimulus doing to the restaurant side? Where's that money going? Is it going into? It's definitely going into the restaurants, which is a great thing. But what sectors, and how do you see that? What happens to that?
Yeah, it's going to both sectors, limited service and full service. I think this stimulus is probably going a little bit more into full service. And again, I haven't seen any preliminary data yet, but probably because there's more availability. And people are able to go out to eat. But even during the other stimulus, let's talk about the December stimulus, getting takeout or curbside or delivery from a full service restaurant is still an option. And consumers say, well, I'm going to splurge a little bit and maybe get a takeout from a more pricey full service restaurants rather than going to a limited service restaurant. But we've seen in the previous stimulus that both of them were benefiting. My sense is probably full service restaurants are probably benefiting more from this stimulus than the previous ones, because there's more availability and capacities are opening up, and people are able to go out to eat and feel more comfortable going out to, and that benefits full service.
And then you had a chart up there that showed your 3-quarter projections at Technomic for 2021 versus 2019. So skipping back pre-pandemic, and I think the numbers were mid 80s for this quarter we're in currently, and then 94%, 96% in third and fourth quarter. Do you think those might be understated based on what's happened the last 30 days?
No, I don't think so. You have to remember the big issue is going to be the travel and leisure sector, where the expectation in travel and leisure, when you start thinking about hotel, recreation, and whatever they give you on airlines, I mean, that's still some food service there. That is expected to be on an overall basis struggling for quite some time, because business travel is not expected to start regenerating. A lot of companies have cut back business travel and are saying, oh, that was kind of a windfall. We didn't have to travel last year, and we still kind of conducted business. Yeah, people will go back to traveling. I think events are still going to be big, but instead of visiting, say, customers, I do it every quarter. Well, I can do a webinar with one. I can do a WebEx one quarter and visit them a second time. So that's going to be a problem, I think, with the hotel business. Yeah, I think we're going to do. People are going to start doing vacations and travel that way, but business travel is a big portion of that. So that's going to take a little while to stabilize itself. So I think that's one reason why I think we're a little bit less bullish on it not coming back fully for the third and fourth quarter of this year. And you also have to remember B&I is also an issue. That's one I should mention as well. Business and industry, white collar. Even if people are going back to work, we're not going there 5 days a week. We're doing it 3 days a week, a lot more remote. Some are closing offices and saying we're all remote now. So that sector is going to really be hurt. It's going to take a long time for that to get back to 2019 levels, the white collar portion of it in particular.
Yeah, I'll throw one more just on the back of what you just said. And there's a question in the chat here about schools and the return of school business this fall. How do you see that compared to, I think we did see the spike in, I would say in, Arizona, Florida, Texas, the warm weather climates where nobody could take a spring break outside the country. Everybody went to 3 or 4 places, and,
right.
And we were overwhelmed on the distribution side by the spring break. Do you think, can you give us your thoughts on schools in the fall, and how do you look at that?
Yeah, if people are thinking that we'll be at 100%, and again, let's go back to 2019, we'll be at 100 versus 2019. We don't believe that's going to happen. There's a couple of issues. One is there's still some discussion among, and again, I'm not making any political comments, but some of the teacher unions are talking about, well, we're not quite sure unless all the kids are vaccinated. We're not quite sure we want to go to live learning. There could be some issues there. So we kind of built that in the cake a bit. But there's also, people online who have kids at home right now or had during the pandemic. Some parents have said, I like teaching my kid at home. I'd rather do that than sending him to school. I did pretty well doing it. So the increase in the number of parents that are homeschooling is going to increase. Now, it's not going to be dramatic. It's not going to be 20%. I think pre-pandemic, it was 3%. The expectation, it may go up to 8 to 9%, which will take away from school business. So it's not going to be at 100%. I think our expectation is probably about 90, 91% of where it was in 2019 right now. So that's kind of how we're looking at that. And then when you look at college and university, especially when you talk about commuter schools, they're probably going to continue to do virtual, as some classes are just easier to do virtual, come in once a week and do the other 2 classes virtually. But then you also think about international students, where it may be difficult for them to come back in the fall. Do you need a vaccine passport to come back in the country? So that won't get back to a full 100, we don't believe as well.
But thanks for that. I'll jump over to John Inwright, and just thinking about your experiences in today's environment. You talked about labor shortages at the restaurant, just getting a fully staffed, getting a restaurant open every day is a challenge for a franchisee or an owner of a restaurant, and then taking that to all the way back to the supply chain. And the labor challenges on the manufacturer side. John, Tracy kind of teed up, if you're a distributor, you're a restaurant owner, or you're a manufacturer, you are facing labor issues like you've never seen before. Overlay the fact that you've got all these challenges around, poultry availability, rationing of shortening in oil, raw materials coming into ports. How do you focus if you're running a supply chain team today?
It's a great question. It's going to be a cloudy and murky answer. I don't think there's a straight path in it. I think a lot of it is that you need to be paying a lot more of attention as a leader of the supply chain as to what's actually happening in the restaurants, because these are unexpected disruptions that are happening to your supply chain at all. Because if restaurants are closing at 2 o'clock in the afternoon because they've run out of staff, and a truck scheduled to arrive, well, there's nobody there to unload the truck. Well, now you've disrupted the distributor. That's another factor. And you don't know how widespread that is. You don't know how many brands or how many restaurant operators are impacted by it. I mean, it's just another challenge that you need to be really paying attention to with the operations leaders within your respective brand to make sure that that information is not only getting back to your distributors, but to your supply chain team, your distribution team, your logistics team as quickly as possible, because it's ultimately going to have an impact. And the labor challenge that John and Joe have talked about, it's real, and it's in every segment of the business. I think I shared that, a major national player, I was talking to an operator that I know just this morning, and he indicated that a major national player that he competes with in a local market, 3 restaurants of another major brand within a 5-mile radius of his restaurant have been closed for 2 weeks simply because they don't have labor based upon what they're posting on their drive-through speaker boards. And then I don't know how many people saw it, but another major player yesterday, there was a TikTok video that went out that's had 1.1 million views as of this morning about another major player, just indicating the challenges that they are having in taking care of the customers at the drive-through window and simply asking for the patience from the consumers about why things are moving so slow. So all of these have repercussions that filter back into the supply chain. So the closer that you can be to what's actually happening in your operations, whether you're a single brand or a multi-brand operator or even an individual restaurant operator, the closer that you are with, the one that's doing last mile delivery is going to be really important to how it impacts your operation.
Yeah, I'm just thinking what you said, that's looking out the front window and saying we really need to know what's going on in our own shop for predictability, demand, and other things. But also, in your past life or mine, you walked in every day worried about a couple of things: food cost, food safety, and continuity of supply. And it's pretty much what the job of a supply chain leader is in a big brand, or a supply chain leader in a distributor, in John Tracy's company or any of the distribution companies supplying the industry. So how do you, and maybe I'd throw new menu development into that too, because there's always stuff going on around new menu development. How do you square the core day-to-day responsibilities up with the interruptions right now? And maybe I'll take it even a step further and say, how do you bring the hammer with you, or do you bring the carrot with you, or do you bring the stick with you when you're working with manufacturers, distributors in this environment?
So Pat, the core responsibilities are the basic cost of entry. You cannot look away from those. Those are essential. They have to occur. You cannot take your eye off the ball on that. It's all this other extracurricular activity that's causing these challenges. And this is where the supply chain teams are getting stretched within their own organizations, because they've got all these new things that they have to face. But they cannot take the eye off the ball of the basic foundational elements of supply chain. Otherwise, you put the consumer at risk, you put your supply chain at risk, you put the brands that you support at risk. So, it's a complicating factor, but it's one of the factors that you just have to continue to stay focused on among your team members.
Yeah, great. I'm going to try to get through as many questions as we can, so I'll start firing them at you here one at a time. John, Tracy, if you had 10 customers on the phone, what's the best thing they can do to help you? Speaking on behalf of distribution, not necessarily Dot Foods, but the distributor community. What's the best thing they can do to help you deliver better performance every day, knowing that you've got a slew of challenges trying to supply a restaurant?
Yeah, I think that's an easy answer to share and very hard to do, Pat. And the primary reason is that it's going to take lots of communication. It's going to take communication on demand on their side when that variance hits, and being realistic about that demand. You buying 10 cases a week of something, all of a sudden you order 500 and expect that to be filled. That's not going to occur in almost any environment, let alone ours. And so I think the more and more we get communication on surges in demand, back to Joe's point, because we are in a surge scenario, that helps. And then surprisingly, I think one of the things that will be a big help, especially on the distributor side, I would probably suggest it's going to occur on the operator side too, but that's not my expertise. On the distributor side, it's flexibility on delivery, because the windows of delivery are a bottleneck, right or wrong. And they work real well when supply matches demand and everybody's got a system that's in check and we're all operating, very efficiently. But we're in this environment. The reality is Saturday deliveries. We're going to have to be in a position to make Saturday deliveries, and I think others are. And hopefully we're going to get in a position where distributors can do that, or afternoon deliveries, or even night deliveries. So I think flexibility on the delivery schedule is going to be a huge component to help get through this. And then the final piece is being realistic on what promises we can all make. I think we've got to do a better job, and I think the manufacturer has to do a better job in making promises that we can keep, and as opposed to telling everybody what they want to hear. And I think the distributor's got to do a better job, and the operator's got to do a better job sharing realistically what is it going to take to get me through the next week or two, so that we can at least provide that product and respond to that demand, even though maybe we don't have the safety stock or the margin or the hedge, so to speak, if volume goes off the charts. So I think those are the big things that we can all do, at least initially.
And I want to ask you, is this changed? Have these changes changed your capacity structure at work? I mean, at Dot Foods, you probably would say, I'm going to guess that you're going to say yes is the obvious answer to that, because you got labor capacity challenges within your own business. But how about physical? Is the pandemic and the way operators are serving guests changed all the way downstream? Do you have less cube? Do you have more in your freezer? Do you have, are you using your vehicles differently? Is the mix of products going into Dot and out of Dot changed materially based on the consumer at the other end of it?
Yeah, I think one of the things, Pat, that I think when the pandemic hit, you heard an awful lot about this is going to be a recession unlike any other. This is Joe Pawlak's expertise, not mine. But I think it was the most different economic challenged arena that we've ever seen, primarily because there was winners and losers. If you go back to 08, 09, I don't know that there were many winners. It was almost all losers for everybody. If you go back to even previous recessions, just about everybody got hurt. But in this pandemic, there were huge winners economically and huge losers. Unfortunately, food service is one of those huge losers, but there were lots of companies and lots of sectors and lots of environments that won. And because of that, I think we're going to see that same thing for a while as we come back, as the restaurants come back, as the pent-up demand that Joe talked about comes back. And if you think about what good operators did during the pandemic to really help offset the challenges they had, the folks that got really good at delivery and pickup, I think that's probably a change that's here to stay for a long time. I think e-commerce got accelerated during during the pandemic. I think that's probably here to stay. So I think there are lots of winners and losers that occurred the last 12 months that we're all going to have to be cognizant of how that affects us moving forward and how that affects the supply chain moving forward and what's going to occur. I can't tell you that the physical capacity of our facilities changed much during the pandemic, but I can tell you that the menu and the mix of products and the demand changed dramatically and has still changed. And I think one of the big issues is our manufacturing partners don't know exactly what that's going to occur in the future. And I would suggest are maybe a little reluctant to make big bets that this change is here to stay or it's going to head back to 2019. I think those are all that leads to that variance that is very difficult for all of us to handle.
Yeah, that's a great answer, and maybe I'll come back to you on this, but I'll go to Joe and then John. Joe, maybe you can answer. This is a very 30,000-foot question, but as you at Technomic saw the pandemic hit, and to John's point, it just ground us to a halt. I think we all figured we were going into a recession like no other, like John said, but that's not really happened. And there have been winners and losers, and it's starting to sort itself out. A lot of that was just dumb luck, what sector you happened to be in at the time the pandemic hit. But a question for you, and then I'll take it to John Inwright on the manufacturer side, and then John on the distribution side. Are you surprised at how well restaurants or how poorly restaurants have done through the pandemic? I think originally everybody was asking you 12 months ago, how many restaurants are going to close, Joe Pawlak? Technomic, tell us how many restaurants and what type are going to close. Are you at a different point in Technomic, and do you believe that restaurants have fared better? And then John, maybe Inwright, you can answer for the manufacturer. Are there fewer manufacturers, more manufacturers? Has this shift to doing more retail affected the manufacturer? And John, maybe Tracy, you can speak to the distribution community. Is it stronger or weaker, or how's the shakeout?
To your question, I think I was very surprised how well limited service did, especially fast casual, especially as fast casual tends to have more of a skew towards urban locations. And as we know, people left cities, New York, Chicago, people that actually lived there, went to the suburbs or went somewhere else for the summer to work, and people just weren't downtown. Fast casual was only down on an overall basis, only down, I believe, 9%. Among the top 500, only down 5%. They were able to make up a lot of those sales with their suburban and outside downtown locations. So that surprised me. What didn't surprise me was on the full service side, where we got hit pretty dramatically. Now, the number of closures, I think when we first came in on this, we thought that we'd lose about 12 or 13% of restaurants, which came out like 100,000, 110,000. We ended up, I think, about 70,000. So we did better there. But I think we got to keep in mind that maybe another shoe may be dropping, because there's been a lot of rent deferrals. And once landlords start talking about, well, when are you going to pay me for my rent, we may see some restaurants starting to close, especially if they're not able to generate the business that they need to pay back rent. But I think still, on an overall basis, I think that the industry did much better than I think any of us thought about last April. I mean, if you drove down the street, April 15th, 2020, there's nobody out on the streets. You go to a McDonald's and you go, hey, how you doing? How's business today? Like, nobody's even come through the drive-through. So people finally kind of got out and just needed to get back to normal, even though they weren't going into restaurants. They were ordering. Restaurants did a great job of pivoting towards curbside and delivery, and people got used to doing that and liked doing that. So I think, the resiliency and the innovation and able to, take things and take baling wire and coming up with something that's going to be a sustainable business shows the innovation and the ingenuity of our industry.
And so I'm going to take it that you're going to say food away from home versus retail. That big shift that happened in the 3 months you're talking about last year. Food service has gained a good share of that back and is likely to come out of this at some point in time. Yeah,
we'll get back to it. It'll take a while. Our 5-year projection still doesn't get us back to 50% right now. Last year, we were at 52%. We went down to 42%. This year, we'll get back to 46%. That's what our projection is. But it'll take some time I'm guessing, again, we only projected 2025, but if you said, Joe, put me in a corner, I'm guessing 27, 28, we'll get back to that 50-50.
And John Inwright, how about the manufacturers? How are they coming through this? Or, if you look at a category like, I'll just pick one, salad dressings, are there fewer manufacturers than there were 12 months ago? Or are those manufacturers shifted enough business over to retail where they're struggling in food? How do you see the and I'm just picking a category, take it where you like.
Yeah, so Pat, I haven't seen a lot of closures or bankruptcies in the manufacturing or processing side. I think, much like the restaurant industry, manufacturers and processors, there are winners and losers among that subset as well. I mean, if you were a major manufacturer to retail, grocery, and food service, you probably did fine, but you shifted your business dramatically relative to the industry segment that you were supporting. On the other hand, if you were a manufacturer that was heavily focused on broadline food service distribution or fine or casual dining restaurants, you had to think differently about your business. Those, however, and this applies to the distributors as well, the big broadline distributors, have suffered pretty mightily over the last 14 months since the advent of COVID. And, the recovery is now helping, but it's still wreaking havoc on their supply chains. But if you were a systems only distributor, particularly around the QSR side, you may have had one of the best years that you've ever had, simply because that's the segment of the business that continued to operate, because it was still easier for the consumer to engage with those types of restaurant brands. So like everything else, I think, and John talked about it earlier, there are a lot of winners and losers, and a lot of it was simply by the luck of the draw. It depended upon what industry segment you were in, but the pivots that we've seen from some operators have been far better than others, and the pivots that we've seen from manufacturers have been better than others. I think the most important thing here is while leverage and scale matters, the most important thing, and it goes back to something that John talked about earlier, is you've got to collaborate with great communication and great transparency. Do not overpromise, but also be careful not to underpromise and hedge your bets. Be honest, be real. Talk to your suppliers, talk to your distributors, tell them what the reality is, tell them what you don't know about your business, and at least, you guys are in it together as you try to figure out the path forward. The path forward is going to be choppy.
John, you want to jump in on the distribution side?
Yeah, I spent most of March and April last year working with our friends at IFTA, trying to figure out how all of us in food distribution were going to survive. And I would tell you that I thought food distribution, quite frankly, survived better than I expected. If you would ask me to predict what would have occurred back last March, especially when a lot of us were barking in Washington, D.C., I think, restaurants were going to get hurt even worse. They got hurt a lot, but we're going to get hurt even worse. And certainly I thought the distribution side was going to get manhandled, and we were going to lose a lot of capacity. And that didn't really occur from a physical perspective. Very few distributors went out of business. PPP loans helped. I think distributor creativity, similar to restaurant operator creativity, helped a lot. They got involved with retail. They figured out ways to use their capacity. They have help with the government feeding programs. I think they got very creative. I think they reacted very quickly to the scenario they're in. And I think we have plenty of physical capacity. The challenge is that all of us in distribution, what we didn't do, even if we didn't lay off any employees, and we didn't, and many distributors did not, you didn't replace turnover. And so what occurred is your capacity on the labor side was reduced. I don't know of a distributor in the country whose capacity in labor did not go down. And because you couldn't predict exactly when it was going to come back or what the surge, to Joe's point, how big the surge was going to be, I don't know of anybody that was prepared for this type of surge from a labor perspective. And then when you add that, you could predict when it would occur. You didn't replace turnover, so you weren't ready for that big surge. And then when you go out and try and hire in this labor environment, I think that's what's really changed the distribution side of this equation. It has less capacity now than it did by quite a bit last April, but it's more all about the labor side than it is anything else.
So maybe a little crystal ball, John. Physically, I heard you that there's room in warehouses. Well, trucks may be an issue, but we can stay away from that. I was really going to ask you, with this employment shortage and competitiveness for labor across all sectors and inside of food service, in the food business, and as you point out earlier, automotive or any other sector you're in, competing for the same labor base. Do you see that carrying on for a year, 2 years, the labor piece in particular?
Well, if I could predict it accurately, I certainly would lose my day job, Pat. I think we could make more money elsewhere, but I cannot imagine this labor challenge going away in 2021. Now, it might get better by the end of the year. Certainly fourth quarter would be my best guess, but I can't imagine the challenge going away. If you take just the transportation side, and truck driver shortage is well known, it's been around for 20 years, gets talked about all the time. But if you take just that side, COVID drove a lot more labor out of the market. Average age of drivers over the road are about 52 years old. Well, we lost a lot of folks that aren't coming back just because of the pandemic crisis. And then we already had a shortage to start with. And then the driver schools had to all shut down, so you weren't populating a lot of new employment coming in. So the driver scenario is even worse than the warehouse scenario. And to say that that's going to get better in 2021, that would be a shock from our perspective.
Wow, that's a lot to think about. I do think we were in a capacity shortage in distribution kind of 3-4 years ago physically, and that started to rectify itself. And now we've got a whole new constraint, and I think we see that. But we see that in restaurants too. So our the customer base is struggling to find workers, as John Inwright said, just to keep stuff open. A couple other questions people are asking about vaccines and requirements for vaccination at employers. Any comments? And Joe, maybe you can weigh in on this as well. John probably has a point of view at that, and then Joe or John, you want to weigh in on vaccinations?
Well, Joe, why don't you start?
Yeah, I guess it's. I really don't have an opinion on it. I do see that there are some operators. It's going to be sporadic. I mean, I think some operators may say that, yeah, we want you all to be vaccinated. I don't know what the legal issues are behind it too. That there could be some legal implications. But I would think that if it's fine legal, there'd be some operators that will require it. But then at the end of the day too, is with a labor shortage, I think they're going to try to get just about anybody they can to work in their operations.
Yeah, Pat, I think that's a short answer, to be honest with you. I think mandating vaccinations in the U.S. From a business perspective in any industry is going to be very, very rare. It's not only a legal issue, it's a labor issue, it's a morale issue. And the reality is, I think in the U.S., there's going to be a lot less people get vaccinated than most originally thought. I think whatever percentage you thought of the 330 million that were going to be vaccinated, I'll take the under, because it's just I think if we've had vaccinations in most of our facilities, and we've even done some of them on site, so we have data, and I think data would suggest that the younger you are, the less likely you're going to be vaccinated. I think that's one. I think the more rural it is, the less likely you're going to be vaccinated. And unfortunately, I think politics matter on vaccination. I think those three factors are going to mean that we're going to have less vaccination in 2021 than most people predicted.
Yeah, and so John, I probably would have taken the over until this latest incident with the J&J, because I think that's just instituted, just further questions among those that were already concerned about being vaccinated, and so now has that slowed down the trend? I mean, ultimately we need to get to herd immunity, but I'm not going to pontificate on what's right or what's wrong, and that's for officials or larger than me.
Yeah. And I wasn't suggesting what's right or wrong. I was just sharing what I think is going to happen or is happening right now.
Terrific. 59 minutes past the hour. We managed to get this done. We did not get to many of the questions, and I apologize for that. I'm, trying to go question by question here and get John and Joe and John and put them on the spot. let me say thanks to the three of you guys for dedicating the time and, putting your neck out there a little bit. And it is all crystal ball. And I think it's actually the great challenge of our industry is to recapture what we kind of lost. I think going back to Joe Pawlak's, we had 52 cents on a dollar in food service. Overnight, it went to 42 cents on a dollar. We're going back to 46 this year, according to Joe and Technomic, and we're going to get our share back in this industry. And, the good news is we can do this together, and it's going to be a bumpy ride. I think that was part of the webinar. And, to the operators on the call, I would say, work with us on the distribution side. To the manufacturers, we as distributors will continue to work with you and, understand each other's challenges. There's two ways to get into the solutions, and it's the carrot and the stick. And I think John Inwright said, whether you have leverage or don't have leverage, in this environment, just understanding your business well, staying on it, and working as partners will help. John Dunyan, who's the Chief Supply Chain Officer for Charles Jr. Hardy, been in the industry a long, long time. Everybody knows John, I think, or many people know John on this call. I think he and I were talking about this a couple of weeks ago, and he said, we can do this together. Like he said, you're standing at the deep end of the pool. You probably ought to hold hands with your distributor and your manufacturer and jump in together for the next year. And I thought he said it really well. Going into the deep end together here for the next year is going to be challenging, and we'll get through it. But thank you guys for spending the time. I want to turn it back to Chris Campbell at the Food Institute, and thank you, Chris, for you guys hosting our webinar today.
Well, thank you, Pat. And I also want to extend thanks to Joe, John, and John as well. I just want to let all the registrants know that keep an eye on their inbox. We will be sending out a recording of this event within the next couple of days. So once again, I want to thank everybody. And we also invite you to continue the conversation on DMA's LinkedIn page. So once again, thanks to everybody and have a great day.